What kind of father walks his son toward death, believing it is obedience? Was Abraham the greatest man of faith in history? Or a man pushed beyond the edge of reason? Because this story is not just about sacrifice. It's about the terrifying moment when faith collides with logic. Most people hear the story of Abraham and Isaac as a simple lesson about obedience. But pause here. This story is far more disturbing than many realize. We're not just retelling an ancient Bible story. We're uncovering the psychological pressure, the emotional terror, and the spiritual mystery hidden beneath one of the most controversial moments in Scripture. Because if we're honest, if God asked most people to do what Abraham was asked to do, they would call it madness. Before Isaac was a son, he was an impossible promise. Abraham waited decades for this child. Think about this. Every year without a son felt like another funeral for hope.
In the ancient world, having no child meant more than emotional pain. It meant insecurity, no legacy, no future, no name after death. Isaac wasn't merely loved. He represented Abraham's entire future. This is where many misunderstand the story. The deeper the promise, the more terrifying the test. God was not asking Abraham to surrender a random possession. He was asking him to place his entire identity on the altar.
Imagine finally holding the child you thought would never exist. Imagine hearing his laugh after decades of silence. This wasn't just Abraham's son. This was the proof that God had not forgotten him. Psychologically, humans cling hardest to the things born from pain. The longer we suffer for something, the more impossible it becomes to release it. That's why this command becomes emotionally unbearable. Isaac may have become more than a son. He may have quietly become Abraham's emotional safety. The greatest rival to faith is not evil. It is attachment. Then came the command that shattered logic. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and sacrifice him. The Bible does not describe Abraham arguing. No screaming, no debate, no here, no resistance. And that silence is terrifying.
Modern readers often rush past this moment. But psychologically, this is one of the heaviest moments in all Scripture. Because Abraham is suddenly forced into a conflict with no human solution. If he refuses, he disobeys God. If he obeys, he loses the very promise God gave him. This wasn't merely a test of obedience. It was a test of identity, trust, and perception. Could Abraham trust God even when God seemed to contradict himself?
One detail the Bible barely mentions: Sarah. Think about this. Did Abraham tell her? Did he leave before dawn because he could not bear the conversation?
This silence creates emotional tension many people overlook. Because Abraham's obedience may have isolated him completely. True spiritual tests often happen in loneliness. Sometimes faith places people in situations where nobody around them can fully understand what they carry. And isolation can make obedience feel even more unbearable.
For 3 days, Abraham walked toward the mountain. 3 days to think, 3 days to stop, 3 days to turn around.
The journey matters. Because delayed pain is often worse than instant pain. Every step gave Abraham another opportunity to quit. This reveals something profound about faith. Faith is not always a dramatic moment. Sometimes faith is simply continuing to walk while your mind is collapsing under questions. Then Isaac asks the question that pierces the entire story.
Father, where is the lamb?
This may be the most emotionally devastating sentence in the narrative. Because Abraham now hears innocence speaking directly into his secret. Notice Abraham's response. God will provide. He does not explain everything. He speaks from trust before evidence exists. And that is the uncomfortable nature of faith.
But this is where everything changes. What if the real test was never about Isaac dying? What if the true sacrifice was Abraham's need to control the future?
Many people assume faith means certainty. But biblical faith often operates inside uncertainty. Abraham did not know how this story would end. He simply chose trust. Visible logic. And this is the hidden terror of surrender. You can obey God without understanding God.
Then comes the moment nobody can escape. Abraham builds the altar, stone by stone.
Notice the emotional pacing. The Bible forces us to slow down here.
Why? Because every movement matters.
Every stone feels heavier than the last. The altar represents something universal, the place where human control ends, and everyone eventually faces an altar, a moment where logic cannot carry them further.
Then Isaac realizes, there is no lamb. He is the sacrifice.
This raises a question many avoid. Why doesn't Isaac run? By this point, Isaac was likely strong enough to resist. Perhaps this story is not only about Abraham's faith, but Isaac's trust, a son choosing to trust a father, who himself is struggling to trust God.
And then, Abraham lifts the knife. Pause here. This is the breaking point.
Faith is often romanticized, but real faith can feel horrifying, because genuine surrender feels like death before resurrection. Abraham's greatest act of faith may not have been lifting the knife. It may have been believing that somehow God was still good.
Abraham, Abraham, do not harm the boy.
At the final second, everything changes. The sacrifice God truly desired was never Isaac's death. It was Abraham's trust. This story reveals a powerful truth. God was never trying to destroy Abraham. He was revealing what ruled Abraham's heart.
Then Abraham sees it. A ram caught in the thicket. Provision appears only after surrender.
This pattern appears repeatedly in Scripture. Provision often arrives at the edge of human limitation. Sometimes people demand clarity before obedience. But many biblical moments work in reverse. The path becomes visible only after trust begins.
But we must ask the uncomfortable question. Why would God allow such a disturbing test?
In the ancient world, child sacrifice existed among surrounding nations. But this story radically separates the God of Abraham from those cultures. At the climax, God stops the sacrifice. The shocking tension of this story may actually expose the difference between destructive religion and true faith. One demands death. The other ultimately provides mercy.
This story survives because it is not just about Abraham. It is about us.
Everyone eventually faces moments where life stops making sense. Moments where logic says quit, but faith whispers continue. The mountain changes form across generations, but the struggle remains the same: trust or retreat. Perhaps the greatest mystery of this story is that Abraham went up the mountain with one understanding of God and came down knowing him differently. Faith is not blind optimism. It is movement despite incomplete understanding. And maybe that is why this story still unsettles people thousands of years later. Because deep down, we all fear the moment where trust costs something real.
So was Abraham faithful, or was he mad? Maybe the story forces us to confront a deeper question. What happens when divine purpose collides with human logic? And what do we cling to when we no longer control the outcome? Because faith is easy when the path is clear. But the real test begins when the mountain appears.
What do you think? Was Abraham demonstrating ultimate faith or crossing a terrifying line? And if you were asked to surrender the thing you loved most, could you do it? Think about that.